The first one is demonstrating clear speaking. Especially if you're technically skilled, you might have a tendency to overcomplicate what you're talking about. This is why demonstrated clear speaking will help make sure that people understand what you talk about.
Sometimes the most complex arguments can be simplified because, ultimately many sort of deep arguments have a very simple message.
There are 3 tools you can use to speak more clearly starting right now. The first one is an anecdote. An anecdote is a brief description of an event without an emotional narrative structure.
Wrote in this book of a Indian minister going to Korea and asking the Korean minister, you guys have done so well. We were the same per capita GDP in the 1960s and now you're an OECD country. How did you manage it? You're so fantastic. And the Korean minister sort of points to a set of volumes on the shelf. So the Indian minister goes much closer, puts on his specs and looks at it and says, why? These are our 5-year plans. And the Korean minister says, yes, but we implemented them.
Now, anecdotes do make it easy for people to understand you, but because they don't have an emotional arc, they will not influence people. We'll cover the emotional arc through storytelling later in the video, but another thing you can do right now is immediate definition. When you use a term that people may not understand, define it immediately.
When we talk about money, it's not just notes. It's also what are called reserves.
Okay.
Reserves are like deposits that the banks hold with the RBI.
But the strongest way to speak clearly is raising rhetorical questions. This is where you talk about what your listeners are already thinking of and bring that up as you speak. When you do this, people will feel heard because you have already said what they were thinking about.
Commodity manufacturing goes where it's the most competitive area. We're really outclassed. Where we find India has done reasonably well is in sort of incremental engineered manufacturing. What do I mean by that?
Another benefit of using rhetorical questions is that people will listen to you with complete attention because you're showing that you're empathizing with them.
Problem comes when you just spread it around to all and sundry as a political gimmick. And that becomes problematic. Now, how to tell the difference?
Now, simplifying everything is especially useful because it will help you speak in a way that will influence and convince people. That brings us to persuasion. Persuasion is increasing the probability that somebody agrees to do what you ask for.
And you're best off trying to persuade the political authorities that, it is in their interests also not to stand in the way.
Persuasion obviously is very useful in both your personal and professional life. There are a couple of tools you can use to improve your ability to persuade people. Now, I have a masterclass coming up soon which has a dedicated module on persuasion. Click the link in the description to join the waitlist for that program now. But the most overlooked way for persuasion is actually second person speaking. This means speaking in terms that are relevant for your listeners. At the most basic level, this can mean giving them relevant examples. Watch how Dr. Rajan uses Raj's podcast as an example here.
Everybody produces more. जैसे आप podcast बना रहे हैं. So if you make 3 podcasts a week rather than 1 podcast a week, you're producing more.
The next way to influence somebody is a damaging admission. A damaging admission is a very well-studied psychological tool. It just means sharing a flaw or weakness openly and honestly. The reason to do that is it will help you build trust because you will be seen as more honest because you are being more honest.
Some of the global forces, but also some of the underlying economic forces. But I had very little Indian experience.
But if you want to be persuasive, one mistake we all make is that we are too focused on ourselves and what we want. Now, what we want is important, but we have to understand the other person's worldview. This is where understanding and aligning incentives come in. Incentives are perhaps the best way to understand what motivates somebody. But before you try to align incentives, try to first understand what the other person is incentivized to do. In this clip, watch him demonstrate the incentives of a political party before an election.
In the run-up to an election, there's a great incentive to waive loans, especially to the agricultural sector, which is politically very important. Farmer loan waivers are very become pressing for every candidate to announce.
So whether it's a colleague, friend, client, or somebody else, before you try to convince somebody, take some time to understand what they're motivated by before you try to persuade them. Because aligning incentives can be incredibly persuasive. For instance, I was looking to hire a consultant to help me with this channel and he was very expensive. But he said, look, if you don't make more than what you pay me, I will give you a complete refund. And that was incredibly persuasive and I almost immediately hired him. wanted him. For you, this means try to ask questions to understand the other person's incentives and then use their language to speak to them. The final habit in today's video is 4-step storytelling. The first step of telling your story is to start by talking about the point of your story, which is why are you telling this story?
I have seen, and we give an example in the book, of people going from poverty to wealthy in one generation simply because of education.
That also serves as a great hook. Okay, so now he's established that he's going to tell a story about the social mobility which comes from education. The next step after that is to create tension.
This fellow Mustafa in the book, father's a laborer, picking up ginger root. And Mustafa goes to school, fails in 6th grade. This is the typical problem for many of our kids. They enter school, they aren't able to keep up, they fail out.
Tension is what differentiates an anecdote from a story. And raising and releasing tension like this is also what makes storytelling special. One way you can create stakes and tension is by bringing up the emotional undertone of your story. Watch as he brings up the shame this guy would feel after failing in school and how his friends would laugh at him.
He goes back to school, all his friends laugh at him. Aap wapas aa gaye. Who are you? I mean, you failed. And his teacher says, be calm, focus on one thing you can do well.
At this point, you've set tension and you've talked about why you're telling the story. The next step is to resolve the tension in the story by bringing up the conclusion.
Studies, does well in math, tops the class, suddenly gets the admiration of the students, then tops school, goes to NIT, comes back to IIM Bangalore, wants to start a enterprise, starts one, making idli batter and sells it widely, and now runs a firm with 2,500 people. He tries to employ people like him.
These kinds of educational stories are incomplete if you don't talk about the moral of the story, which is a step that most people miss. The moral of the story goes over why you were telling the story in the first place. In many cases, it can also mean you share the next action that you want people to take. Here is what calling out the moral of the story looks like.
That's the entrepreneurship which can happen in one generation. Laborer's son becomes a wealthy man, but is giving back. And we can get so many entrepreneurs, we can push so many people out of poverty if we focus on the right things.
Now, if you want to become someone that has a magnetic presence in any room that they walk into, make sure you click the link in the description to join the waitlist for my upcoming program. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.